This is a 1955 Singer Featherweight 221. Obviously, it belongs to a local customer that came to me very frustrated, very concerned because her boyfriend, I believe it was, had used a lubricant to lubricate the motor, and it wasn't the proper type. So the result is the motor now is very sluggish. It's actually showing signs of shorting out. I've already removed the brushes. If you can see that the black, almost like a wet mark on the carbon brush, the other one has the same thing. That's an evidence of an oil getting into that motor, then going into the electrical field, the brushes picking it up. Electricity is like a magnet. Obviously an electrical motor uses a magnet as well, but it pulls all that stuff in, and then it contaminates the entire motor environment. And Singer Featherweight motors are not a cheap thing to replace, so I'm going to do my best to try to at least crack this open and then see what I can do as far as initial cleanup. I'm not going to do all the cleanup on camera because it's probably going to take about 2 hours to go through every crevice, every corner, because you can't leave any of this wrong type lubricant in that motor case, because as I've told you in other videos, it's going to migrate around and it's going to get onto those brushes again. It's going to get onto the copper contacts, the copper wraps. It's going to continue to migrate around that motor, and we're going to be back to the same drawing board all over again. So I'll be doing the thorough cleaning and trying to get all of that out of there off camera, but I want to at least show you how to get the motor off, how to take the two halves apart. In some cases you may have to remove the pulley as well. The pulley is this right over here that the belt is going to ride on, and there's a single screw that's going to hold that pulley in place. Oftentimes, and you can see evidence of it on the side of this shaft, I think you can, probably not super clear, but there's actually rust on there. So I don't know if the machine was maybe stored in a location where it had a higher level of moisture, and metal will kind of attract that moisture to it as well, and if it's not dealt with, then it continues to fester, and then eventually it starts to migrate over every surface of the metal that it possibly can. So we're probably also going to take this pulley off as well, and we may have to use a modified method of doing it. You can't just grab a screwdriver sometimes. You're dealing with screws, even with this model, that are from the 1950s. And screws, like any metal, will start to have some degree of degradation. And they become a little bit more fragile. And you can end up cracking the top of the screw off if you try manhandling it without the right tools and without the right applied force. So I'm going to flip my screen around. We're first of all going to focus on getting this pulley off. You don't have to take this pulley off to separate the motor halves, but I'm going to take it off anyway because I'm seeing evidence of rust and I want to deal with it. So spin my screen around and hopefully we can get going on Sandy's little princess of singers. A very sick princess right at this point. So, all right. So, and I've already, as you could see by the opening shot, I've already removed the motor brushes from this motor because that's an essential part of pulling the halves apart. So the pulley seems to move okay, but I'm going to use an applied method so that I can apply maximum force down into that screw opening on top and not potentially crack it. So what I use, and there's probably other methods as well, is I'll use a vice grip on the screwdriver itself, and then I will have absolute control over that screwdriver and applying that force down and breaking that screw free without breaking the screw. So bear with me for a second here as I try to get this set up. There we go. So I'm going to get it into that groove, and it's also wise to use the edge of the screwdriver to try to clean that groove out a little bit too. Inevitably, that groove will fill up. And actually, I'm going to use another tool that I have, which is even more effective. And if you don't have this tool, it's fine. You can use the edge of the screwdriver, but I happen to have this tool, so I'm going to take advantage of using it. It's a type of a little dental tool here. And you can't see it in the shop, but I've also got my magnifiers on as well, because I really want to be careful. I've had screws crack on me before, and it's a major pain in the neck, especially when it's a set screw like this on a shaft, because yeah, you can drill the screw out, but if you go too far, it's very delicate work. You can get that shaft barbed as well, and then you run into additional problems. So alright, so let me get this in place. Alright, you can't see it in the shop, but I'm applying a lot of downward pressure right now into that screw track to make sure that I break it free without breaking the screw, and we're getting some movement. So I'm going to go in and take the vice grip off the screwdriver now and see if by hand strength, now that we have it moving, we can go ahead and get this out the rest of the way. She's moving nicely now, thank goodness. So I don't know if you can see it in the shot, but it's a threaded screw that basically presses against that shaft, that very rusty shaft right now. And I'm not going to remove it completely. You just have to get it away from that shaft so that you've got the ability to work it out now from there. And then what I'm going to use is I'm going to carefully use a cosmetic pad and a screwdriver to get behind that pulley so I don't scrape or scratch anything. And then slowly work it off of that shaft. Well, and my suspicions were spot on. Let me see if I can turn this featherweight a little bit, and if I have to take the camera off the tripod so you can see it, I'll do that, but hopefully you can see it in the shot. We have a very rusty shaft. There it is. Can't even fully see it really, but you can sort of see all that brown. That's not just the oil lubricant that was applied to this motor. That's also just good old-fashioned rust. The best way to remove rust from a metal surface like that, so that you're not going to hurt the metal and you're going to neutralize the rust that's festering there, is to get yourself some good old-fashioned Q-tips and the equivalent of a kerosene type lubricant. Kerosene is a natural rust inhibitor. It does an excellent job of cleaning up as well. I'm going to add some of this lubricant. You could also use, if you wanted to, you can also use rubbing alcohol also to get that shaft clean. But as you can see, kerosene has an immediate effect in going after that rust and neutralizing it. We don't want rust on any part of this featherweight because it's not going to stay in that one place. It's going to migrate all over the place and start to create problems for Sandy. You can see all the stuff that we got off right there in the shot. Actually, I can't see if you're seeing it or not because I forgot to turn the screen around. But let it suffice to say, it's the only problem with these magnifiers is you can't see where you're walking and you tend to trip over things. So, yeah, you can see it. So we've already made a big impact. You can see that on the on the Q-tip. Hopefully, it's extremely brown and all that rust that we're pulling off of there. So, all right, I'm going to do this other side as well. You don't have to get every speck of it off, because once that kerosene is on that shaft, it is going to continue to neutralize and eat away at that rust. Thankfully, I'm not seeing any pitting on the shaft, because that would be a major concern. Pitting would then potentially affect a number of things, and could also be an indication of the rust being more prevalent than what we're just seeing here. So we've done a good job, I think, of trying to neutralize that. I don't know if you can see that. I hope you can see that. Yeah. So I'm going to toss this Q-tip away. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move the two screws that hold this motor casing together. And it's going to allow us to separate this. But prior to doing that, we have to detach this motor from the machine itself. And that's another screw that is, I can't see if you're seeing it in the shot or not. I'm going to widen this a little bit. Okay, I think that's pretty good. And the mount screw that we're going to be taking out so that we can detach the motor from the Featherweight is the same screw you're going to use to adjust the height of that motor, to adjust the tension on that drive belt. And I forgot to do something that I usually always do automatically. Whenever you're working on a Featherweight like this, to protect this side of the paint patina. I can't see if you're seeing that in the shot or not. Oh, there's advantages and disadvantages to shooting these videos on my own. Let's do that. There we go. I think that it gives you a better shot of what I'm trying to point out to you. So the outside of the pillar here is real prone to getting scratched. So I always put a cosmetic pad on the side of that Featherweight when I'm loosening this screw for the motor mount, so that the turning of that screwdriver doesn't potentially damage the paint on the side of that machine. We're getting pretty close to being free of that. We are now. So I'm going to go ahead and carefully pull this screw out and put it on my magnetic little ashtray. So at this point, our motor is free. And I'm going to move our pulley over there as well, and our motor brushes. I'm probably going to have to just go ahead and replace these motor brushes, because getting oil out of carbon is practically impossible. So rather than put them back in and basically reintroduce an inappropriate lubricant to this motor, we're going to go ahead and just trash those motor brushes and start fresh. Let's see. Actually, that's the way I want to point it right there. Okay. Adjust my shot a little bit so you can kind of see that motor more clearly. There we go. So I think we had a positive effect on that shaft, but I'll probably, once I get done with this video, I'll probably do additional cleaning on there, and might even use a high grit sandpaper to remove the additional rust that's really holding onto that metal. Okay, so the next step is removing the two screws that hold the two motor case parts together. And there's no real magical trick to that other than just stabilizing the motor, because right here on the bottom you've got the cabling, the electrical cabling that's coming out of the case of the 221 and connecting to the motor. So you don't want to be yanking on that and pulling on that too much. So I always just stabilize the motor, get my screwdriver into place, and start cranking away. And yes, you could use a power screwdriver, but power screwdrivers, especially the higher amp ones, the higher volt ones I should say, they can skip off of a screw, and then you end up leaving a trail of destruction across the paint of the featherweight motor. So sometimes haste really does bring waste. So I just do it the old-fashioned way and work that screw loose. And once you get it to a certain point, you can pull it out. That's what the screw, the bolt I should say, not screw, the bolt looks like for the featherweight motor. We've got another one on the bottom, and the easiest way to get to that one is probably going to be to just tilt the motor skyward like so and get that screwdriver into place, and then go ahead and work that bolt loose as well. And where's my magnet? So there's our second bolt right there for the featherweight motor casing. I'm going to go ahead and spin this around, because at this point we're going to be working that casing apart. And I want you to see how that's done so that you don't damage the wires that are inside, the wires that are connected basically to the chamber that those carbon brushes go into. So I'm going to adjust the shot right now. I hope our shot wasn't way off. If it was, I apologize if you were looking at something while I was doing something else. There we go. Actually, I'm going to come out even just a hair more than that. Okay, so again, if the camera did something wonky and went off camera, off the shot, I basically just removed these two bolts from the left side of the motor, which is the same side we took that pulley off of. So at this point, there's not much of anything. I'm going to take off my magnifiers just for now, because it kind of distorts my vision a little bit, and then I end up doing goofy things. So what I'm going to show you next is just how to take the casing apart. This right here in the center that has all the nomenclature information on it, the particulars about this 0.4 amp motor, is nothing more than a metal band that goes all the way around the motor, and it's basically pressed together at the factory on the bottom as a complete unit. So don't try yanking this off in any way. So we've already removed the motor brushes. The way you do that again is, you can see this cap right here. There's one on the opposite end. Take those brushes out before you do this procedure, and then just grab the two halves of the motor like this and gently work them back and forth, not just pulling, but kind of jiggle them a little bit to work them loose, if that makes sense. Okay, again, inside of here you've got the wraps. You can see it's starting opening right here. We've got the wraps and everything else, so you got to be really careful that you don't damage those wires inside. Otherwise, when you put all this back together, you're going to have a non-working featherweight 221 motor. So at this point, I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to try to stop right there. And just make sure that you can actually see what I'm looking at. Yeah, you sort of can. Although I'm going to move the camera just slightly to the left so that you can see it even more clearly. I'm hoping you can see it more clearly. Okay, so we're looking on the inside of the motor right now. We're looking at motor wraps. We're looking at, and the thing that you probably can't see in the camera shot, but I'm going to try to do it, is I can clearly see from my position at the workbench there the oil residue all over everything inside of that motor. Again, it's not gonna, you could apply oil in one spot, and once you run that motor, it's going to be over everything. It's not going to stay in one place. So I'm very carefully bringing this out now so you can see both halves. Hoping you can see both halves. Actually, I'm too close. Ah, the wonders of video. Okay, let me see what I can do to adjust this a little bit now so you're actually seeing. Although that is helpful to some degree because you can see the brown on there. To some extent, you can see the oil. It's going to come out a little bit here. That shininess on that wrap on the copper wires is all oil. This is going to be quite a task. And the wires that I'm talking about being careful with are certainly not over there. Right there. There's one of the wires coming up right there. You can see as well, kind of see inside of the casing all that black. You'll have a little bit of that because of the carbon in the environment, but not to that extent. And I wish this camera could pick up the oil like my eyes can. It's everywhere. So you're going to use a similar cleaning approach to the inside of the motor. You are not, let me say again, you are not going to use kerosene. Similar in the respect of using a cleaning agent that wicks off quickly, neutralizes the oil, and doesn't leave anything behind. And that is the magical, the wonderful, the incredible isopropyl alcohol. Well, I wish I could say that right. Also known as rubbing alcohol. Now, there's lots of different types of rubbing alcohol. There really are. It's basically like alcohol as far as proof. The type that I use is a Walmart brand. And if I zoom in on it a little bit, you'll see that it is the highest grade that I'm able to get unless you use like a commercial license. 91%. I use the higher percent because it has acting agents that are a lot more aggressive in breaking stuff down, appropriate parts of the machine, and it also just gets the job done quicker, to be perfectly honest. So you're going to painstakingly, avoiding the wires, you're going to use some of that rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip swab, and you're going to begin to go over all the parts of that motor that have that nasty oil that was mistakenly applied to this little featherweight, and begin to remove it and break it down. So I'm going to use a smaller container that I happen to have to apply this, and we'll see what effect we can have in beginning to get this done. Again, this is not going to be something that you're going to see from start to finish in this video, because it's going to take me probably a good 2 hours. We're just going to work around, and again, be very mindful of the wires. You got wires on both sides that are going to connect to those chambers that those copper brushes are in, and you don't want to damage that. So it's just working around. Every spot has to be touched and cleaned. Now, we've probably conservatively have done about 10 swipes or so. I hope you can see in the camera what we've already removed. Now, whenever you take something, an agent, and you add it to a motor like this, an electrical field, you immediately diminish what that motor is capable of doing. So the same thing is true of the right type of agent as well, because too much of something in a electrical motor can actually create problems for you as far as how that electrical motor performs. So be conservative in your oiling. You can always add more. It's back to the carpenter's principle. The carpenter's principle of measure twice, cut once type of a thing. So you've got to be real mindful of that when it comes to working with motors like this. And And that oil has even caused some seizing in the motor. This normally, this right here, trying to see if you can see it. I've got lights in my eyes and everything. Should turn very easily. I'm having to use a lot of hand strength to turn this. And that's just telling me again that this motor, I'm hoping I can save it. I hope it'll fire up and run more smoothly, but it is just, it's a mess right now. So again, I'm just very carefully working myself around the inside of the motor. Every part of the motor, we're going to have to clean it up from this oil. We don't have any choice. You know, it is what it is. And kind of like needles when you're sewing, you'll have to change out these Q-tips frequently so that you're able to not reapply what you just took off. That kind of defeats the purpose. So we would continue to work on cleaning up the oil. There's also a lot of copper contacts at the bottom left half of the motor. I'm hoping you can see what I'm looking at. I'm actually going to stand up and see if I can. Yeah. So in here, inside of here, that way, I have to think backwards in the camera. Inside of there, there's a number of copper contacts also that are absolutely critical for cleaning. Now, we're coming in on an intervention because there was something done that has caused serious damage to the motor. It may already have destroyed the motor to a point where we're not going to be able to recover the full power that I always try to bring into my machines. But we're definitely going to give it a Yale try or a Harvard try or however you want to put it, because this machine deserves a second chance. So I'm going to continue to work at this. I don't want to bore you with watching me just basically cleaning the motor, but that's exactly where we're at right now with that stage. We just have to continue to work through the motor, and once we're done with it, and I'm actually going to simulate that we're done with it, even though I'm going to resume cleaning it off camera. Oh my gosh, that's horrible in there. I don't think you can see in there, but that copper is actually wet with oil. It's just unbelievable. Oh my Lord. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, again, this is from like 3 swipes right there too. Got it all over my hands as well. So once you're done with this, you can either leave the motor case open, or I'm going to suggest that you can also dry it up nice and quick so that you don't have to do that, because if you leave a motor case open, there's also the possibility that other things are going to get into that motor case, right? So we're going to go ahead and use cool air, not hot, using a standard hair dryer. And even though we used isopropyl alcohol, which doesn't leave a residue behind, there are certain things that we're going to miss in the cleaning process that we want to try to dry so that it doesn't have an opportunity to create a problem as once we energize this motor. Just like oil paintings can stay wet for ridiculous amount of times, we want to make sure that any of that oil that we missed that is wet right now, that we don't put this motor back together and have that moisture stay in there and then fire up the motor and have a problem. Again, we're using cool air, not hot. Okay, again, this is this part of it is really kind of a simulation because I'm not done with this motor. I've got so much more I've got to do to it. Now, as you start to rotate these two pieces back together to get that shaft back into place so it'll come out, really, really watch those wires. You've got one on the top, one on the bottom, and then you'll just very carefully work that motor shaft back through that hole on the other end and get those two halves to come back together again. And I've got to kind of look over there. So now we've got it in the right track, and then we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to wiggle it to bring it back together, and then put the two bolts back in. And then the last thing that we will do is we will put new motor brushes in the top and bottom before we reattach this to the Featherweight. And at that point we keep our fingers, toes, and everything else crossed, and then we'll go ahead and fire the motor up, or I should say you'll fire your motor back up and make sure that it's running properly. And I would recommend that you do that before you put a load on the motor, so that you can really get maximum RPMs out of it, so that if there's any residue left in there, it's going to create enough heat to wick that moisture out. Okay? So that's again, there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to be doing to this motor off camera to deal with that oil that's in the field, the electrical field in this motor everywhere. I don't have time to show that to you, but I'm hoping that at least this snapshot of how to take the motor pulley off, how to break open this motor casing and get in there and start to clean, which you can do even if you haven't had someone that has applied the wrong lubricant agent to your motor. Over time, your motor's going to need to be deep clean like that, and that certainly is a good preventive maintenance thing to do to maintain that power, to keep as much of that 0.4 amps as you possibly can. So I hope that this premiere has been helpful in giving you a snapshot of how to basically give a spa day to your Princess of Singers and restore some of that power to the motor. Now, if you don't do all the other things that I do, which is about close to 40 other steps to maximize power, which includes all the components of the machine, other parts of the motor that I didn't address in this video, and certainly the foot control and all the other checks and restorative steps that I use, then you're not going to be able to duplicate what I do to my machines. And that's okay, because that's what I do. But this will certainly help you, and certainly help your Princess of Singers in getting some of that spark back, literally some of that spark back, once there's been a mishap of the wrong lubricant, or simply the aging process of the machine and the use of the machine, and you need to address those areas as well. So at any rate, that's it. That's how you help the motor on a Featherweight to at least get some of that spark back, and in our case, to do an intervention so that we can get all that nasty wrong lubricant that was put into this motor and get this Princess going back on track. You will see some sew-offs eventually with this, so be watching for that video so you can see what Sandy's 221 is able to do after this motor intervention and my entire restorative process. All right? Thanks so much for being a subscriber, and that's it. We're signing off.